Representatives. It's just getting underway. We will be watching today the vote on the cut, cap, and balance Republican-led bill. And we also have other events going on. For example, on C-SPAN 3, we're looking at the Rupert Murdoch testimony happening over in the UK. See you tomorrow morning at 7.
Recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour. Each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Fudge, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address bills pending on or already signed into law in 47 states that will disenfranchise voters. These bills will prohibit address changes at the polls, end volunteer-run voter registration drives, eliminate same-day voter registration, and limit the ability of absentee voters to cast their ballot. Many of the bills include highly restrictive voter photo identification requirements. Just this month, Mr. Speaker, the Ohio State Legislature passed and Governor Kasich signed into law one of the most draconian voter measures in the nation. Ohio's House Bill 194 invalidates a vote where a voter properly marks the ballot in support of a particular candidate, but also writes in the name of that same candidate. These bills dramatically reduce the time allotted for early voting and eliminates the requirement that poll workers direct voters to the correct precinct. These new policies are a clear attempt to prevent certain predetermined segments of the population from exercising their right to vote. To be frank, Mr. Speaker, these efforts have an all too familiar stench of the Jim Crow era. The bill pending in my state and all the others are the work of covert opportunists seeking to disenfranchise and suppress the rights of American citizens. I'm here today to tell you that we will not relinquish our constitutional rights, and we plan to fight to uphold the franchise others fought and died to protect. We will not lay down. Mr. Speaker, I yield to my friend from North Carolina, Mr. G.K. Butterfield.
Gentleman's recognized.
Let me thank the gentlelady for yielding this time. Mr. Speaker, across the country, Republican-led legislatures are pushing and passing laws that will suppress minority and elderly voters in the coming election. Under the guise of eliminating voter fraud, Republicans have a solution to a problem that simply does not exist. In my home state of North Carolina, where the Republican legislature is attempting to require voter ID at the polls, there were only 44 cases of voter fraud in the 2008 and 10 elections combined. 44 cases out of over 7 million ballots cast. Is this a serious voter problem? No. Unfortunately, it is a cynical and malicious Republican attempt to suppress minority and elderly voters who turned out in historical numbers for the 2008 elections. Almost 1/4 of African-American voting-age citizens and 1/5 of seniors do not have government-issued ID, yet new laws require them to pay for ID in order to vote. This is a poll tax. We must inform our constituents that their fundamental right in a democracy is being infringed and fight back against this voter suppression epidemic. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield now to my good friend, the Congresslady from Florida, Corrine Brown.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the House and revise and extend my remarks. All across the country, we're witnesses efforts to suppress minority voting rights. How has this been done? By deterring minority voters from registering to vote and from going to the poll. An organized effort to turn back the clocks back to the period prior to 1965 Voting Rights Act. I am from Florida. In my state, our Governor, Rick Scott, is doing everything he can to follow in the steps of what has occurred across the country. To stamp out the gains we worked so hard for so many years to achieve. In Florida earlier this year, Governor Scott signed the ominous election bill, which takes away many of the Florida voters' basic rights. It includes numerous hideous items, much like that in the bills passed in other state legislatures around the nation to keep African Americans and Hispanics from going to the polls or refrain from participating in early voting in the upcoming 2012 election. The new laws passed in Florida would make voting more difficult for people who have recently changed residence, as well as shorter early voting time from 14 days to 6 days. It would provide a 100-foot buffer between voters standing in line to get information, and it goes on and on and on. And in addition, it imposes a $50 fine on election supervisors who are late in filing routine reports to the state. You know, after what happened in Florida in the 2000 coup d'etat, it is amazing to me that Florida would pass such hideous laws, and I think it's very important that the Justice Department weigh in and that the people in Florida are not disenfranchised.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Gentlewoman from Ohio's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As our nation's debt now approaches its current $14.29 trillion limit, many Americans rightfully ask, how did this happen? In the past decade alone, Congress has authorized an increase in the debt 10 times. When Republicans have controlled the White House and Congress, it was Republicans who voted for it. When Democrats have controlled the White House and Congress, it has been Democrats who have voted for it. The federal government has only managed to balance its budget 5 times in the last 50 years, most recently with President Clinton, a Democrat, and Republican control in the House of Representatives. Washington now borrows approximately 40% of every dollar it spends. Foreign investors hold half of our nation's $14 trillion debt, not only from China, but from Great Britain, Saudi Arabia, and other places as well. Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has called the national debt the single biggest threat to our national security. And for the first time in modern history, last year's Congress passed no budget, no fundamental blueprint for federal spending, and no final decision on spending levels through the appropriations process for the entire fiscal year. We have been operating under a series of continuing resolutions, which has led to uncertainty as to federal levels of spending and as to tax rates, which in turn has led to a lack of hiring in the private sector with an unemployment rate of 9.2%, which in turn has led to less revenues in federal coffers, a vicious cycle that cannot continue. Any agreement to President Obama's request to increase our borrowing limit should include a real plan to bring our fiscal house in order and reduce the nation's unsustainably high levels of federal spending, of debt, and deficits. This should include substantial reductions in current spending, at least $100 billion in fiscal year 2012. Limiting federal expenditures to a certain percentage of gross domestic product. The historic norm has been 20% over the last generation. Tragically, we're now at 24%. And safeguards that will restrict future spending, such as a balanced budget amendment, which is contained in 49 of our 50 states. Also, we must put partisanship aside and include reforms to save Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. If we do nothing, for example, regarding Medicare and the President's budget in the winter, did nothing, the program will begin to go bankrupt in 2024, 13 years from now. That is simply unsustainable and unacceptable. When I was a boy and a young man, the fundamental issue confronting the nation was the threat of the Soviet Union and international communism, the focus of evil in the modern world, as President Reagan said. The fundamental issue confronting the nation in the 21st century is fiscal responsibility. Will our children live in a diminished America? Will the promise of America that each generation will do better than the generation before it continue to exist? Will we continue to lead the world, or will leadership pass to China or India or to some other place? This is the great issue confronting the people of the United States, and it is the great issue confronting us here in Congress as well. Let's get our fiscal house in order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of it.
The gentleman from New Jersey yields back the balance of his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, an American president once wrote a letter to the Senate Majority Leader urging him to raise the debt ceiling. The president wrote, "The full consequences of a default, or even the serious prospect of default by the United States, are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. Denigration of the full faith and credit of the United States would have substantial impact on the domestic financial markets and on the value of the dollar in exchange markets." That president's name was Ronald Reagan, and the year was 1983. He closed his letter to Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker saying, "The risk, the costs, the disruptions, and the incalculable damage lead me to one conclusion. The Senate must pass this legislation before Congress adjourns." Watching the House floor 28 years later, you could be forgiven for being surprised Reagan would ever say such a thing. That's because the Reagan who gets referenced on the floor here is a myth, while the Reagan who wrote to Howard Baker urging pragmatism was a man. The real Ronald Reagan once said, "All of us have grown up accepting, with little question, certain images as accurate portraits of public figures, some living, some dead. Seldom, if ever, do we ask if the images are true to the original. In the year of his 100th birthday, the great communicator might be amazed at how far his own image has shifted from the original. He'd see his most dedicated followers using his name as justification for saying no to honoring our debts. He'd see his legacy used to play chicken with the world's greatest economic engine." But as Reagan often quoted John Adams, facts are stubborn things. The facts are these. President Reagan raised the debt ceiling 18 times. He recognized the danger of economic brinkmanship. President Reagan took responsibility when the deep tax cuts of 1981 didn't produce the promised revenue. He worked with both sides of the aisle to find a more sustainable balance. He worked with Tip O'Neill to shore up Social Security. He worked with my predecessor, Dan Rostenkowski, to reform the tax code and eliminate tax loopholes. All of these actions would be condemned as tax increases by the purists who follow the image instead of the man. Image worship is a bipartisan disease. But we all do ourselves and our nation a disservice by distorting past images to justify present policy. As another American president, John F. Kennedy, once put it, "The greatest enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic." To say I disagreed with President Reagan on a number of issues is an understatement. But the more I get to know the myth, the more I like the man. President Reagan was not a picture on the wall. He was President of the United States for 2 terms in office, and he did his best to fulfill his sworn obligations. We in Congress would do well to follow his lead and focus on what we can do during our short term in office. Let's truly follow President Reagan's example and govern for the future, not a past that never existed. Instead of talking to portraits, let's talk to each other. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Illinois yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I am once again on the floor of the House with a picture of children who have lost a loved one in Afghanistan. Eden and Stephanie Baldiff, shown here at Arlington Cemetery, lost their father, Sergeant Kevin Baldiff, on May 12th of this year. Sergeant Baldiff, who was stationed at Camp Lejeune Marine Base, and Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Palmer, stationed at Cherry Point Marine Base, were sent with the mission to train Afghan citizens to become police. The men had just sat down to dinner when a rogue trainee opened fire, killing both men. In an email to his wife the day before he died, Sergeant Baldiff said, and I quote, "I don't trust them. I don't trust them for anything, not for anything at all." This brings me to a quote from A.C. Snow's recent column in the Raleigh News and Observer titled, "Time to Bring Them Home, Let Them Live." Mr. Snow is a well-known and respected correspondent in North Carolina, and I quote, "It seems we never run out of wars. It is as if one small country after another sends out engraved invitations reading, 'We're having a war, please come.' and Uncle Sam goes lugging borrowed billions and thousands of young men and women to sacrifice on the altar of so-called freedom or nation building. Mr. Speaker, I go back to the two little girls in this picture. How many more children would be at the gravesite of a loved one? How many more will have to know the pain of war? I further quote from A.C. Snow's article, and he quoted in his writing, Les Miserables, and I quote from the play, he is young, he is only a boy. You can't take, you can take, you can give, let him be, let him live, bring him home, bring him home. It's a way past time to stop playing politics with the lives of American youth. Bring them home, let them live, not just 30,000, but all of them. I agree with Mr. Snow and many others across this nation who are calling for our troops to come home. Bin Laden is dead, and there are fewer than 30 al-Qaeda remaining in Afghanistan, according to intelligence reports. We have done this, we have done our job, we have won. It is time to bring them home. The reason I continue to come down here on the floor is because of a statement former Secretary Bob Gates said before the Armed Services Committee in February, which I sit on that committee. And I quote Mr. Gates, "That is why we believe that beginning in fiscal year 2015, the United States can, with minimal risk, begin reducing Army active duty end strength by 27,000 and the Marine Corps by somewhere between 15 and 20,000. These projections assume that the number of troops in Afghanistan would be significantly reduced by the end of 2014 in accordance with the present strategy. I share this because I believe we are still in a black hole, even with the President withdrawing 10,000 troops this year. Let's not wait until 2014 or 2015. Let's not bring any more pain to our military families. Our job is done. Let's bring them home." Mr. Speaker, before closing one more time, the faces of these little girls is the face of pain, of a daddy they will never grow up to know. It is time to bring them home, Mr. Speaker. It is time to bring them home. On behalf of Eden and Stephanie and all the children across this country who have lost loved ones, may God bless you and your families. May God bless our men and women in uniform. And may God continue to bless America. Now yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I should consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. My colleagues, as we go home to our districts, I'm certain that no constituent has said they wake up in the morning wondering about what we're going to do with the debt ceiling. In my district, most of them wonder how they got to get a job, how they got to take care of their families. So many of Americans have lost their jobs through no fault of their own. They didn't commit any wrongdoing. They lost their savings. Many are homeless. They've lost their self-esteem. They've lost their health benefits. And they're looking toward this Congress to kind of put America on the right track, restore the middle class that made us such a great and successful nation. Instead of talking about jobs, we find ourselves putting the president in hostage by saying, unlike other presidents, we're not going to increase the debt ceiling. Well, this is a technical way of saying that we owe $14.3 trillion to people that we borrowed from for unnecessary wars, for tax cuts that shouldn't have been there, and a variety of things that unemployed people throughout the United States are just not responsible for. Instead of talking about jobs, they will tell you we have to cut spending. And so the people that have lost their jobs may lose their Medicaid, those who are poor enough to be eligible for it. The older people that soon will be or are entitled to Medicare, and the hospitals and the doctors and the nurses, and of course Social Security that so many millions of Americans come to depend on. Cutting these benefits are not just cutting benefits for the vulnerable, but we're cutting jobs. You can't cut benefits without cutting hospital workers, without cutting off nurses and doctors and those that provide the services for the vulnerable. Is this the only way we can go? Of course not. pastors and rabbis and imams all over the country ask, why are you picking just on the vulnerable? Why are you picking on the sick and the poor and the aged? Is there another way that we can resolve this problem? You bet your life there is. Because just as in biblical days we have among us those have really had God has blessed with riches that our parents and grandparents never thought could be accumulated. Are we asking them to pay just a little bit to ease the pain for those that are vulnerable? I don't know about you, but our pastors and rabbis have spoken out. And for those of you who don't have pastors or don't have rabbis or don't have time to listen to our obligation morally to the people that can't speak for themselves, the people who have no lobbyists, I ask unanimous consent to put into the record what 4,000 pastors have said is not just our legal and political obligation, but more important, our moral obligation. I ask unanimous consent that this goes into the record so that as we come back and try to decide what is our responsibility, some people have come to this Congress with a commitment not to raise taxes no matter what, whether we're attacked, whether the revenue is coming from obscene tax offenses, whether the tax code could be improved. For those of you who remember Kazim Kazi pilots, these were people that were prepared to lose their own lives in fighting our forces during World War II, even if they meant that they were destroying somebody. There are people here that are prepared to destroy the fiscal reputation of the United States of America so that they can go back home and said they fulfilled their commitment about not raising revenues and about slashing and cutting those people that made this great country the great country that it is. So I see on television no one talking about the poor, but thank God we do have ministers, priests, rabbis, imams, and of all the religions and people that have come together, most of whom from foreign lands, to say, this land is my land, in this country a poor person can make it, and we never, never, never will forget where we've come from. Some people have managed to get out of poverty. Others have enjoyed the middle class. Let's hope that our kids and grandkids will be able to enjoy the benefits of doing the right thing.
The gentleman's time has expired, and the gentleman's insertion will be included in the record without objection. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our debt ceiling is currently $14.3 trillion, or more than $45,000 for every American man, woman, and child. By the end of the year, our debt will be larger than the size of our entire economy, a significant amount of that owed to foreign countries. Oddly enough, even though we're driving faster and faster towards a cliff, instead of slowing down, President Obama is hitting the gas. After President Bush's second term, the national debt was $10 trillion. This was accrued over 43 presidents. In just 2.5 years, President Obama has managed to increase our federal deficit by over $4.3 trillion, 40% since he was sworn into office January 20th of 2009. Let me say that again. In 2 years, our government has borrowed nearly 40% of the debt that it took 200 years to accumulate. There's no word in the English language for this kind of recklessness. At the turn of the 20th century, the federal government consumed about 6 to 8% of gross domestic product. Back then, America became the greatest industrial power and the wealthiest economy in the history of the world, when the federal government spent just between 6 or 8% of GDP. Today, the federal government spends no less than 25% of GDP, and on top of that, the rest of the government, state and local, spends even more. Total, around 40% of GDP is consumed by government at all levels. What have we gotten for this unprecedented level of federal spending? Our infrastructure is crumbling, our economy is weak, and jobs are not being created. If government spending stimulated anything, then business should be booming. It turns out the only thing stimulating going on is the debt. And despite all of that, despite common sense, the President is asking for even more credit. The President wants us to trust that government will live within its means this time. Giving a blank check to the government makes as much sense as investing with Bernie Madoff. Democratic leaders think they can continue to spend as much money as they want whenever they want to. They are upset that Republicans are making a big deal about the debt ceiling increase because they want to be able to spend taxpayer dollars without ever having to check or balance to ask if that spending is necessary. Enough is enough. It's time to end this irresponsible spending. Families in southwest Missouri cannot spend 42% more than they take in, and neither should the federal government. I came to Washington to stop spending and abuse of government. That's why I will fight this debt ceiling increase without a serious plan to reduce our debt. And the people of southwest Missouri agree with me. I have hundreds of phone calls and emails and messages in my office about the debt ceiling. It is something that the people in the 7th District feel very strongly about, and I want to share a few of their thoughts with you. 51% of the calls and letters to my office say don't raise the debt ceiling under any circumstances. 26% say raise it with substantial cuts. 10% are okay to raise it whatever. And 10% say you can raise it but do not increase taxes. The people have spoken. There's an old saying that if you owe the bank $1,000, that's your problem. But if you owe the bank $1 million, that's the bank's problem. We're at a point where the financial community, our bank, is starting to fear that our problem is becoming their problem. Two major rating agencies, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, have publicly announced that they are going to reassess America's AAA credit rating. The people have spoken, the business community has spoken. When will the President and the Democrats listen? Every dollar we spend on political preferences is one more dollar American families cannot spend on their children. One more dollar that small business cannot spend hiring an employee. One more dollar that a worker can't save for his retirement. This time, it's serious. Cut, cap, and balance is the first step, but by no means the last. We have to make immediate cuts to show the financial community that we're serious about being good on our promise to repay our debts. And the President needs to get serious. He refused to put his plan in writing, but vows to veto our cut, cap, and balance. A speech or a framework is not a plan. Well, the first thing to do when you dig yourself into a hole is to stop digging. We need common sense reforms that will make sure this doesn't happen again. We need spending caps, a balanced budget amendment. Spending cuts will balance our budget. But most of all, we need something that's not very common sense. I'd like to close with one of the hundreds of letters from one of my constituents. Dear Congressman Long, do not budge. We put you in office to stop these big spenders. Go ahead and call his bluff. I am in tornado-ravaged Joplin and rebuilding my house.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I'm glad you are covering my wallet in Washington.
Gentleman's time
I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Brown, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to revise and extend my remarks and yield to Bobby Scott from Virginia.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition of an unfortunate trend that seems to be creeping up all over the country. Laws requiring voters to show some form of photo ID before voting. Currently, 29 states have laws on the books requiring all voters to show some form of identification before voting, and many of these require a photo ID. Now, my home state of Virginia requires voter identification or a signature on an affirmation of identity form, which is a much better process. But this year, many other state legislatures are considering measures that would require voters to have an actual identification. While voter ID may seem like a good way to keep voter fraud at a minimum, this type of requirement has serious unintended consequences. Mr. Speaker, requiring a photo ID will make it a little bit more difficult for some voters to exercise their right to vote. We should particularly be concerned that provisions like these have a disparate impact on minorities. One nationwide study of voting-age citizens found that African Americans are more than 3 times as likely as others to lack a government-issued photo ID. And these laws have unintended consequences, such as the situation where nuns were denied the right to vote because they couldn't produce a voter ID, photo ID, even though they were personally known to the election officials. Now, it's obvious that voter ID laws will not prevent people from voting, but it creates another little barrier that will mean that a few potential voters will not get their paperwork in on time and will miss the voter registration deadlines. These few voters could make the difference in an election. Mr. Speaker, these voter ID laws are a solution in search of a problem. There's no credible evidence that in-person voter fraud is a persistent problem, and the voters who will be denied the opportunity to vote under these processes will certainly outnumber any fraudulent votes that are prevented. Voting is not an arbitrary, inconsequential act. Mr. Speaker, it is important that we ensure that every eligible voter is given the opportunity to vote free from any unnecessary barriers. Thank you, and I yield back to the gentlelady from Florida.
And I yield the balance of my time to Congressman John Lewis from Georgia, Mr. Civil Rights.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Voting Rights Act made it possible, the Voting Rights Act made it possible for all of our citizens to become participants in the democratic process. Mr. Speaker, voting rights are under attack in America. There's a deliberate and systematic attempt to prevent millions of elderly voters, young voters, students, minority, and low-income voters from exercising their constitutional right to engage in the democratic process. Voter ID laws are becoming all too common. But make no mistake, voter ID laws are a poll tax. People who struggle to pay for basic necessities cannot afford a voter ID. The right to vote is precious and almost sacred, and one of the most important blessings of our democracy. Today we must be strong in protecting that blessing. We should be making it easy, simple, and convenient for people to vote. Before the Voting Rights Act of 1965, people stood in unmovable line. Sometimes people were asked to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap, the number of jelly beans in a jar. People were asked to pass a so-called literacy test. Lawyers, doctors, teachers, college professors flunked the so-called literacy test. Before the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, 46 years ago, many people were jailed, beaten, and some was even killed for trying to register and vote. We must not step backward toward another dark period in our history. The vote is the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have in a democratic society. We must fight back. We must speak up and speak out. We must never, ever go back. We will not stand idly by while millions of Americans are denied their right to participate in the democratic process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentlewoman yield back her time?
Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Herger, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act. The national debt has shattered confidence in our economy, has cost jobs, and is preventing our economic recovery. Working families across our nation are living within their means during tough times. If the rest of America gets it, why doesn't Washington? I recently did a Main Street-style walk and talk in my district where I met with a number of small business owners and their employees. They shared their concern about our out-of-control debt and frustration with Washington for enacting policies that hold down job creation and economic growth rather than fostering an environment that will enable them to thrive. But the comment I heard most often was, "What is Washington thinking?" I told them I really don't understand it either. President Obama has spent his administration enacting policies that have added more debt to our nation than the previous 43 presidents combined. The tragic reality is that the president's big spending policies only made things worse. Unemployment is at 9.2%, and that doesn't count the millions who have given up. The president merely fomented a cycle of debt and joblessness that defines the last 2 years and a half, which has placed us where we're at today. Now, with the national debt at crisis levels, he is standing in the way of common sense solutions, offering only lectures, not leadership. He has asked Congress to consent to continue business as usual without making serious spending reforms. As a matter of conscience, this Congress cannot support allowing President Obama to continue to steer America's debts past the point of no return. Mr. Speaker, we will be judged harshly and rightfully so by future generations if we fail to act. The Cut, Cap, and Balance Act ends the era of rampant government spending. It immediately reduces spending by $100 billion, cuts $6 trillion over the next 10 years, and demands a strong, balanced budget amendment. Mr. Speaker, I believe the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act is what the American people want and what Washington desperately needs. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, in March of 2009, the USS Hartford, a 17-year-old Los Angeles-class submarine, was steaming into port in the Straits of Hormuz. Visibility was low, and they were riding at surface level, ocean surface level, when out of the blue, they were struck by the USS San Antonio, an LPD amphibious ship, which violently collided with the Hartford. The Hartford rolled 85 degrees, throwing sailors, anything that wasn't tied down, flying in the air. The good news is that the collision did not result in a breach of the submarine. There was no leak through the pressure hull. But the bad news is that the sail of the submarine was badly torn, 20 to 25 degrees. The ship limped home to its home port in Connecticut, in Groton, Connecticut, which was a tough voyage going across the Atlantic, again, riding at the surface, which, as many people know who know submariners know is the worst place to ride a submarine, but it made it back to port. And then the challenge was before the shipyard about how to repair a ship that was 17 years old, that was built with totally different technology, hand-drawn prints, a workforce that had largely retired, and parts that really weren't in existence anymore. But the folks at Electric Boat, 450 strong, came together as a team, and calling back some of the retirees, were able, over a period of 18 months, to perform the most ultimate body shop repair job of a Los Angeles-class submarine. And I'm happy to report to this House that the USS Hartford is now back underway, performing its missions, and will extend the life of, again, a submarine that this country invested close to $1 billion 20 years ago when it was first constructed. Again, the replacement costs, if this work had not been done, would have been close to $2 billion. What the folks at EB were able to do was, at a cost of about 5% of that, again, get the USS Hartford back operating, again, a great savings to the U.S. taxpayer. And I want to share this story because it demonstrates that when you invest in people, nuclear welders today, as Admiral Kevin McCoy testified before the House Armed Services Committee last week, have a value to the U.S. workforce almost as great as a surgeon in terms of the skills that they have. When you invest in people, when you have those skills, and when you have the kind of teamwork that we see at EB, this country can succeed in ways that no other country in the world can even touch us. The complexity of a nuclear submarine matches anything that a space shuttle entails in terms of the challenges to support human life in an environment where human life cannot exist. And again, the capabilities of one of these vessels, again, defies almost human imagination. So congratulations to the workforce at Electric Boat for showing again that the United States of America is capable of almost taking on any challenge when it has the right combination of investment, skill, and talent, something which, as we look at our challenges that we face as a nation today, is something that we can both take inspiration from but also learn valuable lessons about where the right priorities of this government should be. And investing in education, workforce skills, again, is the best investment to grow this economy and solve America's problem. Mr. Speaker, I would like to enter into record an article from the New London Day written by Jennifer McDermott, which again documents this amazing story of technological success, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul, for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the Congress is concerned about the debt. The people are concerned about the debt. The markets are concerned about the debt. The world is concerned about the debt and what we're doing here today because we live with a world fiat dollar standard, and so the whole world is engulfed in this very serious problem. I do not understand, though, that if the debt is the problem, and I agree, the debt is the problem, that for us to come here and raise the debt by $2.4 trillion is the solution. That just baffles me. I think it's a distraction because when a country gets indebted to the degree that we're indebted, the country always defaults. This is historic, especially if the country is a significant country. On occasion, a small country will quit sending the checks and they'll go bankrupt. We're not going to do that, but we will default because the debt is unsustainable. This year, it is said that we have a debt increase of $1.6 trillion, but that's not true. If you count what we borrow from the pension funds, the Social Security and highway funds, it's $2 trillion. But if you include the increase in the entitlement obligation, it's $5 trillion. So this is a huge, huge problem. But the argument here is, how do you default? And it is said that if we don't raise the debt limit, we're going to default and not send out the checks. I don't believe that for a minute. Somehow or another, the checks are going to go out. But if you really wanted to live within the technicalities of law, there's a very simple thing you could do. We owe the Federal Reserve $1.6 trillion. Well, that's not a real debt. They bought those Treasury bills with money out of thin air. We could just write that off or quit paying the interest, tide ourselves over and get down to serious business and cut back and live within our means. And that would be a solution. But to increase the national debt will only encourage another type of default, and that's what we're going through. We're engaged in the most difficult and a very bad way of defaulting, and that is through the destruction of the currency. Today, we have an inflation rate of 9%, and that is defaulting. So if a government can default and print money, and if they can get a 50% inflation rate over a period of time, they've cut that debt in half. That is the goal. That is what's happening, and that is very, very serious. Just in these last 3 years in dealing with this crisis, the dollar has been devalued 50% against gold. And gold, of course, is the best measurement of the value of a currency. It's been that way for thousands of years, and it cannot be denied because it's economic law. So we are defaulting. And when the American people go out and start buying goods and services like they are now, they're recognizing they cost a lot of money. So right now, we're in the early stages of rampant inflation, which means we're going to be hit with higher prices and higher interest rates. That is going to be a tax. So I see the only solution, and that is to cut spending. Now, the reason we don't cut spending is one side loves entitlements, and the other side loves war. And even even this token attempt, $100 billion of cuts when we have this huge, huge deficit. But there's no mention of cutting military spending. I don't want to cut defense spending. This military spending doesn't defend us. It makes things worse. Our problem in this country doesn't come only from the Congress. It comes from the people. The people still have a strong appetite for big government programs. They're not willing to cut. They think government can take care of us from cradle to grave and that we can be the policemen of the world. So someday, we as a country, we as a people, and we as a Congress will have to say, what should the role of government be? The founders had a pretty strong suggestion. They wrote a constitution and said the government should be very limited. And the government should be protecting our liberties and providing national defense and a sound currency. We don't do any of that. We've embarked on a course that was destined to end badly, and this is where we are today. So if we don't understand this default will not be because we don't send out the checks. We will send out the checks. It will be defaulted on because people will get their money back or they will get their Social Security checks and it won't buy anything. That is much, much worse than facing the fact that we not raise the debt limit and work our way out of this. That is devastating economically and it's devastating politically because we just saw a taste of what happens, how the anger is built when you see other countries in Europe now defaulting and can't pay their bills. So this is more significant than ever because we provide the reserve currency of the world.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The right to vote is a fundamental right which is at the heart of this nation. This right is under attack. And I came to this floor after the stolen presidential elections in Florida and Ohio to protest the results of these two elections that were filled with voter suppression. Now, years later, 34 states, once again, in our map of shame, require voters to present ID to vote in federal, state, and local elections. And in 15 of those states, voters must present a photo ID, some states requiring that the ID be government-issued, mind you, in order to cast a ballot. However, for any number of reasons, 21 million Americans do not have a government-issued ID required by these voter ID laws, and thus the fundamental right to American citizens is taken away. Most state legislatures have enacted or have proposed legislation echoing similar detrimental voting changes. Many of these bills have only one true purpose, and that is the disenfranchisement of specific populations of eligible voters. In California, unfortunately, there is a voter ID bill pending to suppress voter participation. It would cost, mind you, $26 just to get the required documents to qualify for a government ID. This certainly looks like a poll tax to me, which all of us from the South know and remember as a way to keep African Americans from voting. These voter ID laws have a partisan agenda seeking to deny specific populations of people the opportunity to not to vote, which is really very shameful, before they have an opportunity to elect their representatives in government, and we cannot allow this. So I have to thank Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, the Congressional Black Caucus, and all of our colleagues for their voices to protect the right for all citizens across this nation. And I urge the Department of Justice to be vigilant and aggressive in protecting the civil rights and voting rights of Americans. We go around the world preaching democracy and the importance of voting, yet we are going in the opposite direction in our own country. Now I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Tennessee, Representative Cohen.
Thank you, Mrs. Lee. I appreciate your yielding time, and I appreciate Congresswoman Fudge for bringing this issue to the floor. We previously heard from other congresspeople, and particularly the distinguished Congressman John Lewis, who was a civil rights hero in the 60s and risked his life, as others did, and gave their lives for the right to vote. We are experiencing today after International Nelson Mandela Day. Yesterday was Nelson Mandela's 91st birthday. Next month we'll dedicate a memorial to Dr. Martin Luther King on the Mall. When you think about Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and John Lewis, you've got to think about voting rights and how far the nation and the world have come in the last 45 years, but how long it took to get there. And to think that there are impediments being placed in the way of people to vote, whether intentional or not, I believe those impediments are being placed there intentionally to dissuade African Americans and Democratic-leaning groups from voting in the 2012 election. Rovian tactics to stop President Obama from being reelected and from the public to pick Democratic representatives to switch the priorities of this House to those that would be more reflective of the middle class and people who are yearning for opportunity. But whether they're intentional or not, if they have an effect that is harmful to voting rights, just like other laws, if they have an effect in practice, they are just as harmful and just as wrong as if they were intended to. And there's no question that these type of impediments to require people to get voter IDs, when 25% of African Americans in this country don't have that type of ID, yet 8% of Caucasians are in the same limitation of not having that type of ID, it's obvious that African Americans and students and others are the ones that are designed to be targeted by these laws. In my state of Tennessee that passed such a law, to get a photo ID is not easy. I went myself to get a driver's license with a photo ID. It took 1 hour and 20 minutes, constantly standing in line, no place to sit. It was not easy, and people will not be able to do it. It will be an impediment to them and limit their opportunity to vote. It's wrong. I'd like to yield my time back to Ms. Lee and thank her for, and Congressman Fudge for bringing this to the American public's attention.
Gentlewoman from California.
Thank you. I now yield to the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Congresswoman Gwen Moore.
Gentlewoman has 15 seconds.
15 seconds. Like the last word.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask you about the time once again allocated? This should be under the 5-minute rule.
The gentlewoman has 15 seconds. From California has 15 seconds.
Let me,
does she wish to yield?
I reserve the balance of my, I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time.
Mr. Speaker,
the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Only in Washington can you hear people say that it's irresponsible to balance a budget. I actually heard Democratic leaders on TV this weekend complaining that it would require a supermajority vote to raise taxes on the American people, but only a majority to cut spending. Well, maybe some people have been in Washington too long to realize it, but the American people want to tie Washington's hands and make it easier to cut spending than raise taxes. They want to cap the growth of government. They want to require a balanced budget. For decades, we've heard excuses for why Washington's special and shouldn't be forced to balance its budget. It's time to tell those people that their scare tactics are over. This is a new day. In America, the people are sovereign, and today the people demand accountability. They demand a responsible, constrained government. They demand a balanced budget. Clearly, Washington is never going to choose to balance its budget, so the people demand that we force it to. 49 out of 50 states have some form of a balanced budget amendment. If 98% of the states know this is a wise plan, why do Washington politicians fight tooth and nail against it? The answer is plain and simple: power. They will try to scare the American people any way they can to avoid losing power over this massive, bloated bureaucracy. They will say today that they must have this power, else they can't keep taking care of people. They will try to scare seniors into continuing their unrestrained power to borrow. They say they will manage their borrowing power wisely. They will restrain themselves. Well, talk is cheap. And I've heard this same line for decades. What matters are results. How have Washington politicians been managing their borrowing power? One number will tell you: $14.3 trillion, the amount of our deficit today. A balanced budget amendment is essential because the government has shown time and time again that until we restrain its spending with fiscal handcuffs, the problem will continue. President Obama has only made our spending problem worse by adding $3.7 trillion to the national debt in just 2 years. The President has spent more money in less time than any other leader in American history. Last week, President Obama told Republicans, "Don't call my bluff." Well, I, for one, think this game has gone on long enough. The power needs to be restrained. As Lord Acton famously said, all power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Today, we fight back against this corruption of absolute power. Today, we stand with the American people. Today, we vote to return the power to the people. We invite President Obama to get on board, oppose this runaway spending, and pass a balanced budget. 5 years ago, he agreed. On March 16, 2006, then Senator Barack Obama stood in the well of the Senate and said, "The fact that we are here today to debate raising Americans' debt limit is a sign of leadership failure." He spoke of the, quote, common sense budgeting principle of balancing expenses and revenue. But then, 5 years down the road, unfortunately, President Obama is singing a different tune. He has demanded more borrowing authority with no strings attached. When his own party voted against that proposal a few weeks ago, he started telling us that we must raise the debt ceiling and called our common sense budgeting reforms gimmicks and radical. Well, here's what I'm hearing from people in Missouri, my district. That's where common sense is. Here's Reggie from Adrian, Missouri. Raising the debt ceiling is like handing 5 more credit cards to someone who has already maxed out 50 other credit cards and then sitting back and saying, "You fixed the problem." How dumb would that be? Here's from Michael in Sedalia. Don't give in. As a veteran receiving a pension, I continue to stand behind you and the House leadership in expecting meaningful spending cuts before raising the debt ceiling without raising taxes. Taxpayers don't like what's going on, and we aren't going to sit by and watch anymore. Here's from Margaret from Lake Ozark. A minimum of $4 billion over 10 years is a drop in the bucket. We also need a constitutional amendment since our leaders can't seem to stop spending and do the right thing. Do the right thing now. Here's from Judy from Warsaw, Missouri. The very idea of increasing the debt limit to get us out of trouble is absurd. You cannot borrow your way out of trouble. Deal with it. Cut the pork. Mark from Camdenton, Missouri. We have always had to live within our means, and it's time for the government to do the same. We can't have everything we want. The government needs to be reduced. I do not think my children and grandchildren should pay for our lack of responsibility. Larry from Conway, Missouri. This is a turning point in history. I agree. Let's do the right thing. Today, let's pass cut, cap, and balance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to oppose the epidemic across America dealing with voter suppression and requiring voter ID. Do you realize that almost every election in my own state of Texas there has been discrimination, intimidation to voters? Whereas we used to be able to use the birth certificate, a utility bill, government check, paycheck, and other documents, now we cannot because someone suggests that someone will steal someone's birth certificate to impersonate a voter. I don't think that's right. What we need now is to eliminate the poll tax of the 21st century. Barbara Jordan recognized that voting is a right, not a privilege, and she stood in the gap to ensure that Texas was covered by the Voting Rights Act. Barbara Jordan would not be here today if we had the voter intimidation that we're seeing going across America. Eliminate the voter intimidation and the voter ID requirements. Put in the standard requirements of the identification that people have had and stop seniors and others from voting. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield to Mr. Ryan of Ohio. May I ask how much time, please?
Gentlelady has 4 minutes.
Let me yield to him a minute and a half.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentlelady. Would also like to thank Representative Fudge for her leadership.
Gentleman will suspend. The gentlelady may not yield blocks of time.
I'll yield to the gentleman from Ohio.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank the gentlelady. Would also like to thank Representative Fudge, the Congressional Black Caucus. This issue of voter identification and voter suppression goes to the heart of our Constitution in this country. 11% of adults would not have a qualified identification to be able to go and vote. 25% of African Americans would not have a qualified ID to be able to vote. And I have